So good evening. If you're joining us on the live stream on Facebook, I'm Amy Fox. I'm one of the founders and the CEO of Mobius Executive Leadership, and you're joining us on the last evening of our annual gathering of Next Practice Institute. And Next Practice Institute is the professional development arm of Mobius Executive Leadership. We're so delighted you could be with us for this very rare opportunity to hear Ken Gergen present his body of work. I have the lovely privilege of introducing him and welcoming Ken and his wife Mary to our gathering. I first heard of their work 30 years ago when I was at Wesleyan University studying with some of their disciples. And so it's really a real delight for me personally to welcome you both. Please join me in welcoming Ken Gergen.
Thank you very much for the invitation to come. And I think this will be a different kind of message, and you've been exploring different kinds of themes. So perhaps it can keep you up for another hour. Dinner's coming soon, so hold on tight. Let me begin with a little drama then. Okay, this is a very scary time. It actually began well. Mary and I are in a wonderful village called Ez in the south of France. Really fantastic place. It's nestled up on the top of a mountain overlooking the Mediterranean. If any of you have a chance to go there, it's very close to Nice. Be sure to do that. It's a medieval village with just spectacular. But the next morning, we have to be in Italy, meet some people, and we're going to drive there. And we set out in the morning, but we have to drive down a cliffside, basically. There were one of these wine hairpin turn roads that leads down to the ocean. And we're kind of late. And as we're beginning to enter this set of drives, a storm cloud begins to emerge out of nowhere. And within 4 or 5 minutes, with this strong wind, we're caught in a mist and driving rain, and I can scarcely see, and I'm late. All right. So this is not easy. This is like a tense situation. And Mary's on the outside, so she's on the cliff side, and she's not happy. So I'm driving along, and everyone's like, Ken, and like, oh, yeah, right. Ken, don't watch that. I'm just like, so this is not going well. This is really quite dangerous. So we stopped the car, and we even talked this over. I said, look, let's forget that I'm the driver and you're the passenger. Let's make this a team thing. Let's do it together. And I'll rely on you for information. I'll tell you what I see, and you tell me what you see coming. And we'll do it together. And we'll really appreciate each other being there and doing this. Well, we're here, so it worked. Let me just say that there was a way in which what we had done has gone from a state of relational unwell-being, our relationship is not in good condition and we're dying, to a state of well-being between us in which we end up safe and sound. Now this is kind of an emblematic for where we're going today. Warren Bennis came up with this term VUCA. Maybe most of you know it's been around now for quite a time. When you're in a volatile situation, which this was, unpredictable because we don't know what's coming next. It's complex, what we're trying to do, and it's ambiguous. Now, Bennis used that term to describe the conditions that we now faced in organizations and increasingly in daily life. He wrote that over 30 years ago. That was before we had email. Now, in the time I'm saying this, over 2 million emails would have passed around the world in just those seconds. That was before texting on phones, and an uncountable number of texts have now been transmitted in the time I spoke that sentence. That was before we had phones that were really computers that kept us awake with 24/7 news feeds, which left every piece of news that you were reading behind within 24 hours. You could scarcely remember what you read before. The world just keeps changing with one drama after another that many of them make no sense because you've got multiple voices coming from multiple places, and they don't fit together, and they're incoherent, and they just appear. What happened to reason and coherence? This is before a time when you had more people in motion moving around the world without a home than ever before in the history of humankind. So before the polar ices were melting, and we don't know what the hell to expect next. And before a time when a presidential tweet could send the stock market reeling 300 points less. It's VUCA on steroids. Now, we all know this in a way, either directly or indirectly. It's our lives together. What do we have in organizations as resources? Now, there's a case where our traditions are ill-fitting to withstand or even adapt to circumstances. Because our vision of the organization, at least from the last century, is one built like a machine. It's a logically designed implement for production, with each individual or person in that prepared, hopefully, to do their job to make that machine work. Now, you may not like that metaphor very much, and it may not be dominant so much in your lives, but behind the scenes, it's basically there. That presumption that you are hired as an individual who is prepared in some way to do the job you are supposed to do. And that's a logical fit within the organization to do that job. Right? And if everybody does their job very well, then somehow it should go well. So as I ask, what happened to logic? What happened to reason? What happens to the organization? Is it prepared, as we as individuals, with changes that could occur any time where one has to reorganize, readapt, recreate, envision an alternative where different parts of the organization may be challenged in different ways? How does any single individual handle that? Meditate in the quiet moments so you can handle it better. Yeah, take a pill for depression, for anxiety. Have a shrink handy. Nobody can handle it as an individual. So in a sense, you almost need an organization which is like the flow, is like the liquid flow that we're confronted with now. It is not a stable environment, which those organizations were supposed to be optimal for. That was an organization designed like a machine, more or less required sort of stable inputs and stable outputs, or those who needed the products of that machine. There's no stability, so it's not designed for a liquid circumstance, not designed to take in multiple messages. How do we integrate them? How do we manage with those? How do we manage 5 things at a time which may not fit together? And we got to communicate, and we all have to adapt, and we got to create. How do we live with the flow, co-create with that flow, manage with it, take it somewhere, maybe even be a force within it? and maybe have to give up the organization as we know it. Now, my target here, in a way, is the single individual and the single organization. That is, the bounded units which we have in place, these fixed units. I mean, I read a headline the other day, all right, the New York Yankees baseball team, they have spent in the last 10 years $2 billion on players, more than any other team by great, great margin in any other team in baseball. They've got the best players in the world. And they have never in that time won a World Series. As one of them said, we have the best players, but that doesn't necessarily mean they know how to work together. Best players don't do it. So the question I've had, a number of others, how could we reconceptualize who we are in a way that emphasizes that connection, that who we are together? I mean, it's kind of strange because what we sort of understand, well, here I am and there you are, and we've got those in focus, but it's not easy to focus on what happens here. It's not. It just goes on. It's a movement. You can't pin it down. I mean, you watch a film where two people are talking, the camera will be on the person who's talking, and then the camera on the person who responds. But the conversation really depends on the coordination. Without the coordination, there is no conversation. So how can we think about the coordination as prior to the people in it? Or another way to make this more radical, how is it possible that out of the coordination, the people come to be what they are? That presses it a bit. But let me try, if I can, to make this plausible at least. Because if you can turn that conceptual corner, life changes in really important ways. Okay. I've got all these words I'm delivering here. I didn't make those words up. They're not my words. Every one of them comes out of some past conversation, some past reading, some past engagement. But nobody else made them up either, because they didn't get to be words except out of the coordination. Anything can be a word, or any sound could be a word if you'll coordinate with it in a way that I'm using it. But if you don't coordinate, it doesn't mean anything. That is, words are quintessentially byproducts of a process of coordination. No one owns them. No one owns them. Now look, I can share the words, none of which are mine, all coming out of not my head. I didn't make them up, not my invention, not my creativity, not my soul. They're all coming from other relationships. And here they are. But what are they? I mean, by 9 hours later, some of you are going to be a little sleepy. They don't mean anything. They're just a haze. Some of you are going to be a little bit resistant of those. I don't really follow that. I don't think it's right. That doesn't agree with things I already know. I challenge that, and that's okay. Everything is challengeable. Some of them, you may find them curious. I wonder where he's going next with this. I'm not sure. Let's see where the other slipper falls. Some of you may find them a little bit interesting. Oh, this is something I might be able to get into. And even occasionally, I hope somebody will find them inspiring. Just one, maybe. Huh? So what did I say? I didn't say anything until there was you. It was just blah, blah, blah. The sounds. And what do you do with them? You do many things with them. You just push them aside, get a nap, question them, find them interesting, find them inspiring, and I don't own any of that. That is all you're doing. I can invite you into what I'm doing, but what happens next, you've created. So I don't create anything. So I don't cause anything. There's not a communication as cause and effect. The words come into life, or I come into life, only as you give it to me. And it could be a wonderful life, and it could be a horrible life. Actually, my ancestors I have two ancestors who were burned in Salem, Massachusetts for being witches. So their words weren't particularly well taken. Now I hope we're not in that space again. But I'm going to leave shortly after this lecture. Okay. Now, you have given me meaning of various kinds, but you couldn't do it without me. Until I uttered something, you couldn't say, I disagree with that. I mean, you could do it, but it wouldn't have any meaning. It would be sort of nonsense. So, like all the words were co-created, we have now co-created the meaning here, and we've done it multiply. And this can go on in the next turn of the conversation, where you speak, and you will come into meaning through me or your mate. Well, let's push that a little bit further. Okay, so the words are there, but here I am with these gestures and walking around here. Now, like the words, that makes a little bit of sense. It's not like strange. But I didn't make up these gestures. I didn't make up the tone of voice. I didn't make up the speed at which I'm walking. I mean, I could like walk here and then you want this and then let me tell you about this and let me tell you about that. I mean, I could have done all of that. It makes no sense. Every word, every gesture, every tone of voice is like the words. They came into meaning, into being okay, because we co-created them as okay. They had meaning for us, and they were all right, and they seem right now, pretty much. Clothing. I didn't make this up. Nobody, single person made it up. It is the same as the words. It gets to be something because someone said, let me try this. Oh, that's really quite nice. And we could sell that. And somebody had to say, yeah, well, I'd like to buy that. And it's coordination all the way down. And like the language I'm speaking, I'm just carrying coordinations into my garment. What if I took away everything that I am, that didn't come out of that coordination? It's like removing everything in your house that wasn't made in China. What would be left over? I don't know. What, breathing? Digesting? I mean, physical movements, I think, I hope. So Mary and I are on the way to the airport here, and it's a heavy volume of traffic with a lot of people moving quite rapidly. And Mary said, look, you know, here are hundreds of people moving very rapidly, and all of them are moving within some kind of system of meaning, or they all have some, like you might say, narrative in which they're living. They want to get to a job because it's important, and that's important because they need money, or they have to raise children, or they whatever. And they're taking this route. I mean, they have a whole complex array of meanings, which they didn't make up and no one made up. They just happened to be in the flow of those, you might say, conversations of living. All are moving, whole mass driving. So what is it that holds us all together outside of those coordinations that gives us a meaning in life outside of those coordinations? Outside of some way in which we have made sense of the world, would it make sense to meditate? The first time I tried meditation in Japan, this was Zen meditation. I didn't know very much, very young. And I must say, I had trouble with going to sleep, with my joints aching. And I came away after an hour of that, and I'm not being able to sit that long in that position. It was like, this is really horrible. Why do people do that? But now you put me into a tradition, a long tradition of what that means and what it means in some kind of metaphysical way, what it means physically, what it means in the tradition. I can get into that. That's really important. But it wasn't a person discovered meditation and just said, sit there. It's like we had to generate a whole array of meanings around that, which would give it significance. And one can even go and say things like pleasure and pain may come of that. What gives you pleasure? Did I like a single malt scotch when I was 12? A sip of beer would like, now I'll pay quite good money for 1 ounce of single malt scotch. Because it's inherently delicious? No, it's not. Like Zen sitting. If you have the romance, which I say is us co-creating it, it becomes absolutely delicious. So pleasures, what are they? What are they outside of? And I don't want to push this too far, but outside of the significance that we co-create together that makes them what they are. So, what if we took that orientation, and we don't ask, what's inside my head, but what relationships is my head inside of? What is the well-being of those relationships? What nourishment do those create? I mean, we have a tradition, for example, of arguing, right? I mean, everybody here is taught to argue. I mean, having an education which generates critical thought, I mean, what would education be without that? If you want a PhD, it's not only critical thought, you are created or find yourself as a shark. That is, you can destroy virtually any argument that he puts up, including your own, because you're trained to do that. But let's say we get into an argument. Now, arguments have a tradition. They're like dances. You say this, I destroy it. I say this, you destroy that, and so on and so on. You say, oh, that's irrelevant, doesn't matter. You know, what you said was over. I mean, you know all the moves. But argument preceded the fact that we started talking. Argument is like a dance that we inherit, and once we engage in the dance, we become pretty nasty people. Right? So in that sense, the tradition of relationship, of coordination, is one which we come out of as certain kinds of people. All right. And one thus then asks what kinds of relationships there are within organizations that would allow us to drink in multiple sources of information, and be able to share those within the organization in such a way that we trust each other and understand where they're coming from and can not necessarily resist them, but can together work on them and possibly do something with them, add them all together, reorganize them, recreate some other directions or multiple directions at once. What kinds of relationships would it take to do that? Ask about the coordinations that we could make and see where we go. So what happens then, the question is, what happens if we place relational process as the prior, is what we're really interested in, and individuals themselves as secondary? Now this is a what if. We're not truth talking here, this is an orientation. It's a make-believe in the same way as every other thing that we say. So what if? Well, okay, go back to leadership. Now, what it begins to say is, look, it's fine. There are a lot of books about what a good leader should be under these conditions. I mean, we're all wrestling with that. We've been wrestling with it for 30 years. What is a good leader under those conditions? Enormous number of books. Most of those books emphasize the characteristics, the character, the ways of being of the leader, him or herself. Be understanding, be listening, be compassionate, be cool, and so on. Right? And you can go, if you take the books, and there must be now about 200 that have been written in the last even 5 years, 200 books, and you could get a list of all the things you ought to be under these conditions. And that's okay, except realize that everything that you're going to be isn't anything until people pick it up and do something with it. You don't control that. What you say doesn't become anything until someone picks it up and does something with it and says, hey, that is compassionate. Or, that looks like compassion, but I think it's fake. He's just manipulating me. Same. So none of those qualities are qualities in themselves. They only become qualities within the process of relating. And that's not easy. It's not easy to be a singular self who's trustworthy under those conditions. You can be for yourself trustworthy, but whether it seems trustworthy to anybody else is another matter. Okay, so that's a limit. Now the second thing one is advised to do, and I like this up to a point as well, and that is to try to set in motion, if you're in a position of leadership, set in motion those activities or those processes which will bring the coordinations together so that we can share the knowledges, share the values, share what we need to know coming from all sides, and in which we can do something with it. So there's a lot of emphasis on decision-making groups of various kinds. Distributed leadership, emergent leadership, cooperative leadership, collaborative leadership. All these come up in the literature. And they're fine up to the point if people know how to do it, or would do it if they could. Just putting people together to discuss something doesn't necessarily mean much of anything if you don't know how to carry on a conversation in which you can disagree and still care for each other, in which you're not vying for the position, or which you're not required to defend yourself, or where you may be judged by somebody who's superior. I mean, all these things that get in the way of being in groups in ways that will allow the flow to be productive. I've sort of eavesdropped a couple of groups over the last day in which seemed very excited and interesting, like a lot was going on. Now that sounded like a really, what I would call a generative conversation. People listening to each other, doing something with it, taking it somewhere, and surprises were developing. Now that's an art form. That's not a natural act. We acquired that. That's like a wonderful thing that we can do. That's like having a dance that we have learned to do under certain conditions that we can do them. But how could we take that kind of dance into an organization? How would we share that skill? How would we come to be able to do that? It in the same way that listening is a skill, so is the act of cooperating or collaborating with anybody. I mean, I just want to stop for a moment. Listening is a skill. Okay. When I was young, I had this professor who I'd be talking and he would listen and he would go, yeah, what, yeah. Now that's a form of listening that drove me crazy. It's like, he was listening very well, but it was like checking out points and moving me on because I was talking too slow. I was raised in the South. I tend to talk a little slower. I've had people who seem to just be, they're listening, but there's no movement in their face. And I don't know what that means, but it's not fun. It's like, yeah, I'll react in some way. It's like listening is not just hearing things in the ears, it's a whole movement one makes. And it changes you. As a listener changes you if they do it skillfully. You become something. My first days at Harvard, okay, I'd just come fresh out of graduate school, and they put me into this office building. It was actually a house that was owned by a senior professor who was retiring. He was giving his house to Harvard, and I was going to be able to be in his house. And he was like, wow, he's just a great person. I don't know, I don't have anything to say. And he introduces himself, and then, tell me about yourself and what you do. And so he listens, and he like brightens, and he asks me more about it, and asks me more about it. And then we part pretty soon after that, and I come away feeling, God, what a great man he is. And he didn't do anything but listen well. So it's a skill. Okay, so just doing things that are leaderly is not sufficient. It's a question of how to set these motion into processes that can move us with the flow. All right, so how could we extend the listening? Well, here are a couple of things that I really have liked. One organization, this was in the UK, that had consultants go and talk with, that was a big organization, talk with a lot of people, all the way from the lowest level all through, record those, try to find out what is going on, what are they saying, what are they liking, what should we do, and trying to funnel those into the higher echelons of the organization. Now that's okay, it was like a way of listening, but it's not dialogue. So what comes next? It's a little bit close to surveillance. So this is an organization in Finland. Actually, it's a consulting organization. What they've created are softwares that allows a large organization to have video chats that would connect any parts of the organization. So you might have an upper level management be in touch with a research and development group and have the whole groups there sitting and talking with each other, trying to exchange, where are you now, and what do you think about this, and so on and so on. Respectful conversations. So you could not simply have small groups, but you could have whole areas of the organization connected with each other. And I kind of like that. To me, was a good move, trying to allow us all to be in the conversation. What about making decisions? Well, decisions are complex under the VUCA conditions, that is obviously, because there isn't any rationality that's dominant. For every rationality, there are 8 others that make that problematic or would change the possible scenarios that could take place next, and anything can disappear in its legitimacy the following day. So you need multiple voices, reporting, sharing from multiple perspectives, multiple experiences. How to do that? I mean, we're all pretty much agreed that top-down's really got its limits. Okay, here's an organization that, large organization, American organization, well, it's an American subsidiary of European organization. And they are told by the European head office that they have a month to come up with a plan to reduce the cost of operation by, I can't remember, let's say 10%. It was a significant reduction in costs. Now, normally what might happen under that circumstance, you call in McKinsey, maybe, and they'll tell you what to do. But for a lot of people in an organization, those are scary circumstances, because it usually means downsizing. And it puts everybody under stress. I need to look for an out. I need to find another job because I wasn't hired there long ago, or I cost too much, the organization, I'm gonna look elsewhere. It is a killer in terms of morale within the organization. So what they did was to set up several teams, each composed of people from all areas of the organization, from top to bottom. Okay? And those teams were challenged with, what should we do to cut the cost? What would you do? Think about it. Create something, create some ideas. And they hired consultants, but they were sort of to set up the groups and to help them communicate with each other after a day's work. For example, they try to summarize things so that the other groups could find out what was happening, where they were going. And after about a week of this, the groups together generated, I can't remember, it was about 20 proposals about how they could cut the costs. Top-level management accepted 80% of them. Not one job was lost. All the people felt like, this is us. We have done this together. We have managed together to make this decision, and we're all in it. So the sense of solidarity, in addition to solving the problem for them, was enormous. Okay, bringing us into a sense of coordination, so the well-being is in the process. I like very much appreciative inquiry. Most of you know it. But it's more than just a technique. In fact, that way of approaching decisions has actually changed the whole field of organizational development in a way. Because it relies on this notion that we co-create the world. We co-create the realities that we live in. Right? And a lot depends on how you understand them. So if there's what you call a problem confronting the organization, it is a problem if we say it's a problem. If that's the way we define it, it's a problem. And if we talk about it as a problem, that's going to bring us down. How do we solve it? Who's at fault? And so on. That is the way in which the problem becomes increasingly real and increasingly onerous. and sort of a heaviness about where we go next. Now, not true for all, but for many problems, that can be the case. So why do we call it a problem? Well, let's call it a possibility. Let's look on the positive side. What could we create together? Here we've got a situation. What could we make of it? So you've got a group of women in an organization who are about to generate a class action suit for harassment and for glass ceiling. It's a real case. Now, AI group would come in, a consultant, and say, look, let's not solve this problem by saying, well, look, if we change this policy, everything would be right. And if men would only learn how to do things, things would be right. And here are the rules by which we will operate in the future. And this will be the new future, top down. Now they say, why don't we have another kind of conversation? Why don't we bring people together and pair off in men and women and tell a story about a time when things really went well? When you worked with a man or a woman, and that was superb. The outcomes were just right. Now let's share those stories. So you concentrate on the positive. What are our resources? What are our dreams that are implicit in those resources? So we bring those stories together, and then we're going to say, well, look, what is the value here that we really care about that is common within a lot of these stories? And what if we talk about how we could realize those implicit values as we move forward? Because we all know them. We all know the values. We all care about them. Let's have a discussion not about who did what wrong, but what we can create together. So the whole conversation shifts now. The whole tenor of the relationships in the room. And we can work together to create something that we really care about, all of us. It changes the whole nature of the life together in the organization. Now, for many people, that's been an eye-opener, and that kind of thing is now morphed into a number of different practices. What I think has been most fascinating about it is that you realize that you can create change within an organization just through the forms of discussion that you have, by changing the nature of the coordinations, the way in which we talk together. So there are no rules being imposed, no top-down requirements. But if you can enable people to speak in certain ways, you can change the whole conception of the organization, your place in it, and what you're doing and why it's valuable. The new organizational development based on how it is we talk together and what we make real and how we create each other in that conversation. Creativity. I mean, we come out of a tradition in which there are creative individuals. The movement here is to saying, look, there are no creative individuals. Creativity doesn't exist until there's somebody there who says, hey, that's creative. That's why the refrigerators of America have the greatest art from 3 years old you've ever seen. That kid's really creative. So, creativity, why don't we bring people together? And this is, I mean, we know this is creativity by design. Bring in multiple people, and if you have the right kind of conversation, new things will come out of it. We have a son of a friend of ours who's a major computer designer, and he's hired by a group who said, look, a financial group, who said, look, can you come and meet with 6 other people, and this is in Boston, actually, and meet there. You don't know these people. They come from different areas of the computing world. And you people, this group, create the next big thing. You don't know what it is. Nobody has an idea of that necessarily, but you're really good at what you do, and we trust that with this combination of backgrounds, something will come of it. And if you want to be in on that, you want to start that company, or you want to invest in it, that's up to you. We just want you to be in the room. And indeed, 5 days later, they come up with this major idea that was important for a fair period of time. Co-creative. Always going back to the process. How does the process work? How do we do that? What would be the forms of the process? Now, in some way, we're inhibited to do those things in most organizations, partly out of this tradition of the bounded unit of the single individual, because the organizations are often built on each person being their own person, making their own decisions. The buck stops here with me. You're responsible for that. I'm hired for this job. So you've got a whole array of problems that are just built into the traditions. As I've talked about before in the discussion group, it doesn't necessarily collaborative. And one of those issues has to do with performance evaluation. Because I'm going to be evaluated by somebody about how I perform in this group. And everybody in that group is going to be evaluated in some way. And my future in this organization depends on those evaluations. So the very fact of performance evaluations stands in the way of a productive coordination. How could you change it? Well, again, there's a group in Finland with which I've worked, and what they do is to try to have groups evaluate themselves. And they ask questions to the group about what each of them brought to the group, really positive questions. What did they bring to the group? How did we do? What could we have done better? Okay? So all the questions are about us. That is, they create the reality of that unit or that group and ask how do we function together? Without looking at somebody and blaming them, saying you didn't do well. Well, what did you do well? That's, again, a move toward trying to undo the individualism of the traditional organization. Pay, merit pay, especially. It's a killer. Look, it's me versus you as to who's going to get paid the most. And if I do well, I'm going to get paid, and you're probably going to be fired. So I'm not going to share anything with you that's going to make you look good. I'm going to share only things that make me look good. And if something comes along and makes me look bad, I'm not going to share it at all. So you close off the information, you close off the transparency, the movement of information and ideas and so on through the organization. So pay is a killer. Now, at Swarthmore, where I've worked, they tried to undo that by saying, whenever you come in, you will get paid every year. The increases will be based on the same level for everybody who came in. Doesn't matter how well you do, how students love you, how many publications you have, how many committees you've served on. The pay is the same. And it's really, compared to other places I've taught, it just takes away a whole set of issues. You may not like it. Everybody thinks they did better than everybody else, but you don't raise the question. It just never comes up. It doesn't stop you from doing what you do. You don't do those jobs because they pay well. So how else could you do it? And I think that's really a major question, how to be creative about how pay works. One of the ways in which I really feel is untapped, and I think here in this group you have the resources for tapping it, and what I can understand. And that is the value of doing things that aren't necessarily for money. I think for most of us, if we just had to work for the money, it really wouldn't be worth it. If that's all we got from it, it would be more like a little like slavery. There was a big survey several years ago that came out that asked people in large organizations, if they had their druthers, would they rather work in the private sector, whether it's for foundations and so on? And most of them would. Vast majority would. Because there was some value often in foundational work. We help with AIDS in Africa. We're delivering food to people who don't have anything. We're trying to create world peace and so on. There's some kind of value there that really appeals to you. It's worth doing. It's like that old poster of that kid who's got carrying around his little brother, and he's saying, he's not heavy, he's my brother. It's like it's valuable. It's valuable to do it. How could we increasingly invest organizations with those, even profit-making organizations, with some kind of value? I mean, even university teaching now is losing that. As people go to university simply to get a better job, and people were hired and fired in university simply by numbers of publications, it begins to look like a factory. And the joy of actually researching something, reading, caring about students, all that, the real joys of education are being wiped out by that factory motif. So somehow bringing that back into the center of things. I love an initiative that comes out of Case Western called Business as an Agent of World Benefit. What they've done is take major businesses and get them involved with how they can, not with how they make money by quote, exploiting others, but what they contribute to those people where they work, what they give back. And they tell stories to each other about this, and they get proud of them. They want to do more. So the organization now becomes one which, yeah, we do well in caring for those who work here and people who want those products, but we also care and give back to the societies in which we work. Wonderful. Now I want to close this off with one more conjecture because it's important to me. It seems to me it's not simply us as individuals who are at stake here, that is, in terms of trying to realize how wedded we are to the process of co-creation. It's not just organizations, it's the way in which the world is going. I mean, you just take organizations. Any organization is like any individual. It seems to be a bounded entity, but it's not. Any organization depends on at least 30 other organizations to even keep it going. It's not its own trajectory. Here I am moving through the world. You need all those other organizations just to survive, just to get the lights on, just to get there in the morning, just to have heat in the building, just have a coffee there. I mean, it's all interdependent. How to work towards the well-being of the process of interconnection, not the units, but the process by which we relate to each other. So if we just continue to compete with each other in a kind of neoliberalist fashion of who makes the most money, the environment will go and public good will go. Now, take that up a notch to nations. How do we relate to other nations? Because if we just stand for ourselves, and that's our goal, like the private individual, like the private organization, if that's our goal, it will become a Hobbesian world of all against all. All this attempt to collaborate, let's build units that are larger than the individual. Let's submerge national boundaries within a larger system. Let's begin to look at the climate as an issue that all of us must face together. You almost have to go in that direction. You know, our future depends on not focusing on the well-being of the unit, but the well-being of the relational process. So a lot's at stake in this. Anyway, thank you very much. I'm open. I don't know whether I'm supposed to stay and talk, but if anybody would like to raise issues or comment or questions, I think we could take 5 minutes. Yes.
Say about what it means to have a liquid organization or a liquid
Yeah.
organizational boundary, and also this last sentence that you said about attending to the relational process.
Yeah.
So I heard you mention listening as one such practice.
Yes.
Are there other relational practices that you could enumerate for us?
I think there are two levels of that question. Listening, I've said, looks like an individual act in the same way that compassion would be, or caring would be an individual act. But I try to point out those are not individual acts. They're parts of process. So they're parts of a dance, and they in themselves are nothing. They're more like invitations. Let me have an invitation to this dance. And we could go on with that, and I think you could take, again, a lot of those qualities out of those books and say, yeah, there would be ways we could do that, and that would probably be good invitations. So it's not to eliminate the wisdom in those, but to say, look, those are wise as parts of relationships that may be useful. All right? And one might say, then, could we expand that vocabulary? And how could we do it? We could share, and we could read more. And we could also have training in how to do those things. I mean, one of my greatest concerns over the last couple of years has been how education doesn't do that. How education primarily looks at each individual, grades each individual, work on your own, do your own work. And grading reinforces that, so everybody's out for their own self. And so dialogue becomes difficult. And how we could change that, how we get rid of the grading systems, so that it's much more dialogic process of growth. Now, the other thing which is intriguing, and I won't enumerate it here, but there are now books emerging on the kinds of conversations, how you could structure them. I mean, AI is a structured conversation. But there are a lot of others now emerging. Liberating structures is another one. A whole book of ways you could think about organizing a meeting that wouldn't lead to conflict, that would have some dynamics. And how to take those kinds of structured conversations, say, well, look, we're meeting this afternoon. This afternoon, why don't we do this? Everyone will go around and say something about what the person before them has said. You know, there are a lot of variations on these. And those really need more attention. I'm really glad to see them moving into focus. I'm sorry?
I think her other question was about liquid boundaries, or what a liquid how you meant the word liquid.
Yeah, well, I'm borrowing here in part from Austrian theorist by the name of Zygmunt Bauman, who's written a number of books on liquid society. And it's not exactly the same as what I've been doing, but it's very similar. What we've moved is from persons who are knowable in themselves and have relationships that we can know about and trust and rely on, to a world in which we are all in motion. And he laments the loss of what you might call solidity, but also recognizes that we may be in a different space now where we have to rethink these issues of how we relate to each other. Yeah, and how to do that, and what you're getting here is how you could think positively about it. Because I don't think, I mean, it seems to me inevitable with what's happening now in technology that this is only going to get, I mean, what quantum computers are going to do in the next 5 years, it's unimaginable. I talked to the guy the other day who said, look, in a couple of years, there will be a computer that's so fast it can crack any system. It can get into any banking system, any political system, because it can rapidly compute all the possibilities of all the things that could go into that and crack it. So what happens then? What happens when we can all take each other's electric power and the next day wipe it out and you can't use a cell phone 2 days later? Yeah.
Just a clarification. Thank you very much. This is very interesting. I'm not sure I understood it, so I just want to clarify. You were saying focus on the well-being of the relational process rather than the well-being
Yeah.
of the unit.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? How do you measure the value of the relational process and the quality of the relational process without looking at the outcome of the unit?
Yeah.
As a whole? So would you have kind of analogy of a sinking ship, but everybody's getting along really well, but we're not keeping it afloat, right?
Yeah. Where this line of thinking will take you is eventually discouraging measurement as the way to do this. Because a measure is somebody else's view of what you're doing, and the very fact of measurement puts you under duress. It becomes, you only do this because of the measurement. I mean, it's the way in which school exams run. Yeah, we'll teach to the test. So rather than measure, the question is, could we have a conversation, a dialogue about how this has gone? I mean, it's the same question that AI runs into. How do you know appreciative inquiry does anything? Let's measure it. Turnover, for example. Now, you can do that. I'm not saying never, but I'm saying, look, that process will do a lot of things for a lot of people, and not all of them will be good. Some people will be bored of it. Some people think I didn't get a chance to talk. So rather than say, let's have a measure, now we have an outcome, and you might have an outcome, but let's say that's a piece of the conversation. Could we have a dialogue? But how'd that go for us? Let's talk about that. So that the conversation never kind of ceases in terms of what it did, what happened, how it went.
And how it went.
That process is a continuous process.
So describing how it went would be about people's emotions as well as productivity. Again, I agree with all this. I'm just trying to make sure.
Yeah. I don't have a singular answer to that. I'd say it was really interesting watching this group in Finland try to do it for an organization, and they would fit these questions about how did we do to the organization. So there wasn't a standard set of questions. It was like, what kinds of things for your organization would really be important? And let's put those into the questions you would ask yourself. So, I can't just come up with that quickly.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.